Before we get too deep in this video about Ammannia Gracilis, I'd like to tell you this is brought to you in part by Aquarium Co-op. Full disclosure here, I got this plant, these two pots, for free. Sin gratis. Totally free to try them out, see how they adapt, and roll into my tank. So that's what this video is about, to let you know I've experienced this plant for a long time, and I wanted to see, it's been a few years since I've had it in any of my aquariums, and I definitely wanted to see the quality from Aquarium Co-op, see what it's like, and also be able to share with you guys some of my experience with getting it from there and how it's worked out over the last couple of weeks. Ammannia Gracilis comes all the way from West Africa to the USA via the family Lythraceae. It's a stem plant. That's kind of the easiest way to describe it to you. This is a stem plant that grows quite large, okay? So be forewarned that this needs to go to the back of the aquarium, or at least the middle of the aquarium. Now, my aquariums are 24 inches tall, so I do kind of have the space to allow them to grow pretty tall, so it's not that big of an issue for me. If you happen to be utilizing this plant in a smaller, shorter, let's say you got a 10-gallon aquarium or something like that, that's fine. You can still utilize this plant because you can actually just trim the tops and replant them and keep it short via that typical stem plant propagation method, and that's not going to be a big issue for you, other than you're going to have to do a little extra work. But if you are running a nano aquarium with this plant, that's kind of to be expected. Most nano aquariums are going to take a little more work than large aquariums like mine. Now, this plant is actually going to be going into the 240-gallon aquarium, which is an 8-foot long, kind of a beast of an aquarium, and it's been running for quite a long time. So I'm happy to actually add some new flair, as it were, to this aquarium. I'm going to be placing it in the back in front of some really tall crypts that you will see later in the video to offset so that there's actually green behind it, and not just to have that plain old black background back there. I feel like this is a plant that doesn't look that great if you just put it up against a black background. So I would normally place this, from the front to the back of the tank as like the third plant, right? So you'd have two in front of it, one behind it. That's kind of the spot where I'd like to put it. As you can see, I'm cleaning the pots here and removing all of the stems. And as you can see, there's quite a generous portion of stems in here to get started. So I'm happy to say, I think I looked this up a little while ago. It's like $8.99 a pot. I feel like I'm getting good value out of it here. So even though I did get these ones for free, I would have probably bought a couple of pots at $9 personally. As you guys know, I have a serious plant collectoritis situation on my hands here, so I probably would have just brought this in anyhow. Now, one of the reasons that Ammannia Gracilis is going to grow so large, it is trying to become emergent out of your tank. So what does that mean for you? It's going to try to grow up into the air. Now, for a lot of people out there, that's actually a benefit. Depending on who you are, that might be a benefit or not. But that is what this plant is trying to do. So I would keep that in mind, that that's realistically, ultimately, its end goal, is to continue growing up out of the water. But that gives us a brilliant opportunity to maybe utilize this plant instead of pothos if you were going to put it, say, in a hang-on back filter and allow it to grow up into the air. That's pretty advantageous because it's going to pull a lot of extra ammonia and nitrate out of your water if you happen to have a fairly overstocked situation that you're trying to kind of remedy the potential of dirty water. And this plant does grow fast if you give it a lot of light and a lot of CO2. So if it's growing emergent out of your tank, remember it's going to be up in your air, getting over 400 parts per million CO2 in our air that we breathe every day, which it would be a considerable amount of CO2. So it will grow rapidly, and keep that in mind if you are going to be growing it emergent from your tank. Now that I have all the pots cleaned, it's time to get them over to the aquarium and get them planted. And I do have at the end of the video an update after a couple of weeks of this growing to show you guys what it looks like once it transitions from this kind of green wide leaf emergent growth pattern that it's currently in, and get it transitioned into submerged grown form. As you can see, it's fairly green right now, even though you see some of the red hue to it, but it becomes much thinner leaved and really red under a lot of light and a lot of CO2. Bringing that into the conversation here, it doesn't necessarily need a ton of CO2 or a ton of light in order to grow well, but that's really going to be the optimistic way for it to grow. Soft water, some of the time, I wouldn't go over 7.5 pH or anything over 85 degrees. That seems to kind of be the point where it just can't handle. Anything below 70 degrees is going to be too cold for it, but this is a pretty hardy plant, even though people consider it to be moderately difficult. I've never really had that serious difficulty with it, although I have had it transition and have problems with overheated tanks or overcooled tanks. So I would keep that in mind. As long as you have good consistent water, it's not going to be that big of a problem plant for you. Good substrate is definitely going to be key. In this tank I have a bunch of fluorite, which actually isn't that difficult to come across. Eco-Complete, something like that would be fine, although you'll see me planting it into the Fluval Stratum, which does happen to be my favorite filler substrate. I do occasionally use ADA, Brightwell, and a couple other brands also, but I typically mix a lot of my substrates, and the 240 here has pretty much every kind of substrate in it. I currently have Dragonstone, some large pieces of driftwood and things like that, but it is pretty much a mishmash of all of the substrates and things, so I would bear that in mind. And this tank is very mature. Most of all of this stuff, as far as the substrate and everything goes, I've been using for upwards of 5-6 years. So I would also keep that in mind too. Things do grow very well in this tank because it has been maintained and operated for basically a really long time. And I'm happy to say that it does continue to go on into its newer incarnation with some Ammannia Gracilis. As I mentioned earlier, I'm planting this right in front of those giant Cryptspiralis I've got in the back. That's not the Retrospiralis or the Tiger or anything like that. That's just the plain old Cryptspiralis that grows super tall. As you can see, it's growing all the way up to the top of the aquarium, out of shot on the camera. So it's creating a lovely backdrop for this plant. I don't think that this is, as mentioned earlier in the video, I don't think this is 100% just a main focal plant. I feel like this is a great filler plant. It's pretty easy to grow and continue to propagate it. I wouldn't put it all the way at the back because I feel like it's just too much red at the back of the aquarium against just a plain old black backdrop. But perfect mid-ground plant, especially in bigger tanks. You know, smaller tanks, you're just going to have to trim it and replant it more often, so it's not really that big of a deal. This tank is running at about 6.8 pH, temperature's about 76, 77 degrees, right in there. Generally speaking, whenever I check the temp, that's right about where it's at. And it has already converted, and we're going to take a look at some of the converted stuff. This is one of those plants that doesn't typically melt for me when it converts from the emergent grown, although you can see that some of those more red leaves have started to grow, but you'll see quite the dramatic transition to the much redder plants after conversion. And the leaves tend to be a lot skinnier and thinner than they are versus the emergent grown version. But overall, it's a plant that I've had at numerous occasions, and to be honest, I think I've kind of gotten rid of it over the years just because I kind of have a tendency to get bored with this plant. But I think going with a different strategy now and not necessarily using it as a focal plant, I think it's going to work well as I continue moving along with this plant. I want to say thanks for everybody for having stayed this long. Hopefully you enjoy some of this update footage here at the end of the video. You'll notice some of the rocks have changed and there are some other plants added in, and don't worry about that. I'll be making videos on all of the plants I've been adding here. There's a bunch of new plants in this aquarium, and I think I counted up the variety of plants. I think I have 42 different species now in this 240, so it is kind of getting out of hand. But of course, I'm going to keep adding plants because one of the big things with the project in this tank is to see how many different varieties of plant I can get into one large aquarium and have it still continue to be a healthy ecosystem realistically. How many plants can I honestly get via the hobby into this aquarium and have them all running really well. If you found this video to be helpful at all, be sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button. I guess that's really a big deal these days on the old YouTube. But if that's not enough for you, I would honestly say you could either hit the membership and join button or check out our Patreon page, which the links are down below, and you'll be able to join up our community and get access to the Discord and all that kind of stuff, which, hey, maybe you want to be a part of the community. We have a pretty good time on there, and things are going quite well. So hopefully maybe that's something that you'd want to do. I don't know. But either way, special thanks to Aquarium Co-op for sponsoring this video, and there will be a link down below. You can buy it if you like. You don't have to buy it. It's a real no-pressure sale. Yeah, it's going to be the end of this. Later.